years. Cute thought.
Good thought, yes. Yeah.
You know, I'll tell you one more thing I've learned through the show, which is that when Krishna passed away at the end of the story of the whole epic, they say it was the beginning of the Kali Yuga. And the Mahabharat happened in the Dwapar Yuga. The Ramayana happened in the Treta Yuga. Now, again, if we go back to this timeline that I just mentioned, effectively, does it mean that the time difference between each of the yugs is 7,000 years?
One may reach that conclusion. I would say I will give you a brief on the yuga, but that may require a full episode. That's how fascinating it is. Yuga, in the Indian context, the simple definition, if you look at the time, is a period of time. That's the simple definition, a certain period of time. Like, you know, it's like saying, bring me a cup of tea, but the cup size may change, something like this. So yuga is a certain period of time. There is one researcher in Odisha. He's a retired IPS officer, Arun Upadhyayji. He has collected 26 plus different definitions of a yuga. To that, I have added 10 plus. So possibly the number sits at this. But to simplify the matter, I would say yuga is not even the period of time. Okay, there is a sense of it. I'll give you a quick, the Nile's notes on that, Cliff's notes. Okay, 4 types. For example, in Aitareya Brahman, okay, this is based on your action. The yuga is defined. I will just, instead of Sanskrit, I will just go English straight.
What is Aitareya Brahman?
Aitareya Brahman will go now, say, think of Vedas. The Veda has a Samvita, which is the mantra. After that, when the mantras are used in a yajna, there are some other manuals, like how to do the yajna. Okay, so car, you know how to drive a car, but how to maintain the car, or how to start the car, check the car. So that is the Brahmana Grantha, nothing to do with the word Brahman otherwise or something like this. Then there is a Aranyakas, which is a philosophical discussions on those mantras and the yajna. And then there is a Upanishad, which is essentially Guru teaching that same philosophy and everything else to Shishya. So like that. So one of the Brahmana Grantha, Aitareya Brahman, connected to Rigveda, it says when you are sleeping, you are in a Kali Yuga. When you wake up and sit up, then you are in a Dwapar. When you stand up, you are in a Treta. And when you get into action and you start walking, that is, you are in the Satya Yuga. Krita Yuga. It says, Charayaveti, Charayaveti, Charayaveti. Keep on walking, keep on doing action. Stay in the Satya Yuga, stay in the Krita Yuga. Now, this is nothing to do with the time. This has to do with the action. Okay, so let's look at another one, the emotional state. Like Einstein's, you would have heard, like, you know, you sit with a beautiful lady for an hour and it feels like a minute, and you sit on a hot plate for a minute and feels like an hour. By the way, do you know that Einstein actually performed that experiment? So that will be a digression, so I'll not go there. 1938, after doing this experiment, he wrote a paper. He borrowed Charlie Chaplin's wife for the date. And he traveled from New Jersey to New York in Oyster Bar, sat there, and when he felt like, looked at the clock, 57 minutes, and he felt like with Charlie Chaplin's beautiful wife, he felt like it was only a minute. Then he went to New Jersey, performed the other experiment, sitting on a hot plate. Anyways, so exactly like this. In the Bengal, there was a great saint, you might have heard the name Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Like Hare Krishna movement sort of comes from that. He wrote only 8 shloka. One of the shlok he says, because he was a great Krishna Bhakta, Radha and Krishna Bhakta, he says, Yugayitam nimeshena. So the word Yugayitam nimeshena, Chakshusha pravrushayitam, Shunyaditam jagat sarvam, Govinda virahename. If I have a separation from Govinda, my Ishta Devata, nimesha, just a blinking of an eye, that time feels like a yuga. So he's stating an emotional state, just like Einstein's theory there. This is the second kind. The third kind is what people have confused for the fourth kind. The third kind is like, you have heard 432,000 years of Kali Yuga. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
Double that is like a Dwapar, 864,000. Triple that is a Treta, and then 4 times that. That has absolutely nothing, nada, to do with the chronological yugas of Ramayana, Mahabharata, and so on. That has everything to do with a mathematical computation formulations in astronomy that allows us to tell us the absolutely precise and accurate orbital periods of planets. But somewhere that confusion happened, and it was used and understood to be the durations of yuga. And that's why you are comfortable when only 7,000 years. I'll come to that in answering that. The third one is basically there is a yuga of 5 years. Okay, in the calendrical yuga, the Panchanga yuga. And then that was used along with the astronomy evidence of the type I refer to talk about the time periods. Okay, now to answer that question, so you said it seems like 7,000 years and the yuga is changing, possibly so, but Mahabharat gives a beautiful definition. If you remember recently, our Prime Minister Modi ji, he referred to Kala Chakra badal raha hai. If you have heard that statement in the context of Ayodhya Mandir and so, you know what it is. Actually, how do you change the Kala Chakra? We do it. And Mahabharat says, Raja Kalasya Karanam. A king or an administrator, depending on how he administers the kingdom, the particular type of yuga comes. And I will not belabor on that point, but Mahabharat goes on giving many examples of this. So depending on the administration, a time comes. And I add my original contribution, just like Raja Kalasya Karanam, I say Praja Kalasya Karanam. Praja has to develop the civic sense also, and a different type of yuga comes.
Okay. What would you like to say about that 7,000 year duration?
It's very magical. Okay, I find it very useful in the sense of mnemonics, but just the way I look at things, although it's a fascinating numerology thing, I don't read more into it.
Okay, fair. Let's talk a little bit more about the reality of the Mahabharata. The one thing I've always questioned, even as a kid, was what were Rakshasas? When you talk about Hidimba, Ghatotkach, Bakasur, effectively, if you truly try attaching it to reality, was Bakasur some kind of a cannibal? Like just a really well-built cannibal? Was Hidimba and Hidim also something similar? And then if that's the case, why do we have a Hidimba temple in Himachal Pradesh? Where they say that, oh, this is actually where she lived near Kheer Ganga, which is now known for stoners who go up to trek to Kheer Ganga.
Right.
But there is a Hidimba temple there.
Yeah.
That's one question. Second question attached to that is, this is something very, very fascinating I learned from a Parsi priest who was on the show. What he spoke about was that Zoroastrians are also an ancient culture. And I've really deep dived into Zoroastrianism, which is the religion of the Parsis. I figured that it's perhaps definitely the sister religion of Sanatan Dharma. I'm pretty convinced.
I agree.
Even when you talk about the modern practices, it's literally in parallel with Sanatan Dharma. Be it worshipping fire, be it mantras, be it avastha, how we have Sanskrit. Now, in their mythology, the word daiva was villainous.
Yes.
In our mythology, the word asura was villainous.
Yeah.
Cuter fact, in their mythology, Ahura is noble. Like it is the name of the angels.
Yeah.
And they pronounce Sa as her. We have Somras, they have Homras.
Yes.
So their Ahura, is it our Asura? And their Daiva, is it our Dev?
Correct.
Now, if we try attaching these pieces of culture to reality, perhaps we were two warring tribes. And in our epics, the Asuras are painted sort of as villainous. But if you actually study the Vishnu Puran, if you actually study the Ramayana, there are some slightly heroic Asuras as well. So it's not like you're painting all of them as negative. You're painting most of them as negative with some exceptions. And I'm 100% sure that they would say the same about Daiva and Deva.
Yeah.
Also, they were based out of Central Asia. Iran, Uzbekistan, all these places. Now, was that what we count as Patal Lok in our culture?
There is a name for that land. Not Patal. Patal would be South America.
Okay.
Interesting. This one is a Uttara Kuru.
Okay.
And Uttara Kuru was known from this, we can talk about like a Ramayana times, because there is a reference to Kuru jungle in a Ramayana, which is like a Haryana area. But the Kurus were known. Uttara Kuru was known to Ramayana. So 14,000 years ago also Uttara Kuru existed, which is Iran. Think of northern Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, that area, east of a Caspian Sea. 2000 years ago, the Greeks also referred to that land. Do you know how? Uttarakoro. Basically Uttarakuru. Okay. But that may take another episode, but let's come back to this. Actually, I studied, just like what you said, the Persian for a long time. My study started with Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who wrote a book, the Orion and then the Arctic home in the Vedas, going back to 140, 150 years. By the way, he is the Adya archaeoastronomer in the world, not just India. Using astronomy in a way to understand our history in the modern times was started by Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Okay. So the references that you said to, and I would ask you a question, did your guest, the Parsi guest, mention how far in the back in antiquity they refer to Zoroastrian religion?
Yeah.
Because I will say, if you want to say the number, that's great. If you remember how far back he wanted to go.
It went roughly to what you're talking about as the Ramayana time period.
Great. Because in Mahabharat, there is an indirect reference to Narad Muni coming to Yudhishthir, and Narad Muni, think of this as the journalist, but journalist with the integrity. Okay. So there is a reference to Narad Muni coming to Yudhishthir and referring to a certain practice with the fire worship and all of this in a somewhat distant land, but not that far distant land, and as a very mysterious, interesting practice in about 7,000 years ago. Okay, but there are enough references. In fact, there is this reference to Atharva Veda. They are the followers of Atharva Veda. That is what is known. But something else, Asura, actually, if you look at into the Rigveda, Asura is actually very much eulogized, very much praised. It's not seen in the negative way at all. Indra is called Asura, which is the highest deity there, so that's not, Varuna is called Asura. Over time, this is what happens. Why now we may say Rakshas as a bad person. Rakshas, the Sanskrit basis for this, there can be many meanings. That's the beauty of a Akshara. Shabda can have many meanings in the context, but Akshara, which is just a letter, can also have many meanings. When you combine, it becomes different meanings. Rakshasa is Rakshamiti Rakshasa, the one who protects. But think of it, one who protects, which means he has to be powerful or she has to be powerful with the weapon knowledge and everything. Now, someone who is a powerful, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Over a period of time, something counter can happen. Simple example is our Sikh brothers. Not all of them, but Sikh, the origin of Sikh is into protecting Hinduism. But eventually, when the Khalistan movement came into being, they were talking things against India or against Hindus and so on and so forth. So those who were meant to protect Hindus at some point for 1,000 different reasons, we'll not go into that, almost became enemy. That can happen. That's the reason of this. Now, so Ravana was a Rakshas, but Ravana is in the disciplic succession, he is a son or a grandson, great-grandson of a great sage, great rishi. But person can turn around, that can happen. Back to the Hidimba and so on, so forth. Who are they? Basically, they are human beings. Just to simplify things, I would say maybe they were people from Africa and they were having a connection. So somewhere they were looked at as slightly different things, different powers. I'm jokingly saying this, but actually there is enough basis with a Ravana who has conquered the whole world. He had gone all the way to South America. In every direction. And even India, he was controlling all the way to Himalayas and all the way to where we are sitting right now. That's why his generals were there into Nasik, where actually eventually Shurpanakha incident happened and then Ravana snatched away Sita. So he was controlling the pockets. In the old times, he was very powerful. So because of that, he has these relationships in the different parts of the world, and then so intermarriages, so you can say transnational marriages across the boundaries. So but they were human beings, very powerful human beings, very altruistic, very virtuous human beings.
My conjecture, and again, this is based on just hypothesis, perhaps slightly emotional hypothesis, because I love these epics, is that I think lifespans were longer then.
Lifespans were directionally longer, but not sometimes you hear terms like, say, Bhagwan Ram, after he returned, ruled for 11,000 years. That is not to be taken literally. there is a statement that sometimes, the formula helps you. In engineering, you substitute something and, kilocalories, calories like that. So there, the formula is ahoratra samvatsara. The common sense should never be left out, So ahoratra samvatsara, which means in certain circumstances, you consider a reference to a year equal to the day. And of course, vice versa.
Got you.
So 11,000 can be divided into days and that will come to 30 years or something like this.
Got it.
So not those extreme years, but to your point, absolutely valid. Based on the calculations in the Mahabharat, we have to accept there is no other alternative to accept that Bhishmacharya was about 140 plus years old at the time of Mahabharat war and he fought for the first 10 days. That's almost impossible for us to believe. I don't mean folks out there. It's impossible for me to believe that.
Yeah.
But
in
there is
books like Autobiography of a Yogi, where they speak about detailed Kriya Yoga, which is a form of yoga that involves, for lack of better words, your own energy channels or pran or chi, like Chinese culture.
Yes.
They actually talk about how you can extend the biological life of your body. And there's multiple chapters on it. Not going to deep dive into that for the sake of a free-flowing conversation.
Yes.
So I would assume that lifespans were longer.
Yes.
Health was generally better.
Yeah.
But the human outcome of a longer lifespan is a longer time to build bigger kingdoms. Because effectively humans are tribal species.
Yes.
So effectively what you're saying is they were probably just physically much better human beings.
Correct.
Who may or may not have had some kind of mystical powers, which is why they were initially perhaps kept for the protection of society. They had goodness in them as well.
Yeah.
But sometimes power could corrupt.
Correct.
That's